Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started here. So I'd like to ask that you can find your seats, please. If you have not already grabbed a handout from the bar, please do so. That's helpful information during this presentation and will be useful to take home with you as well when we start emailing out for our advisory vote too. So thank you again for being here. We're going to do Town Hall 2.0. We did our first one last Sunday, and there was very helpful feedback and questions around that information. So this version goes a little deeper into what we have to talk about and is kind of twofold. Part of this is heavy on the governance education side. One of our issues, I think, that's kind of bubbling over in our community is that we as members, whether we are in the audience or on the board, are not really as educated as we need to be on what governs our community. And we're paying for it, both in our relationships and in our finances. So this is going to go a little deeper into what we're working with and what has been maybe hiccups or issues in the past and how we are working to correct those things. And then we will look at the specifics related directly to the Clubhouse and what those options are as well. So thank you again for being here. So part of this presentation, and specifically for the Clubhouse, is to make sure that we are charting a path forward together. And part in my presentation tonight, we're going to be reading through all of this twofold. One, so that we are on the same page, and so that the recording that we share also has an audio for all of this and not just the little slides in the corner. So why is this important? The board seeks to align with membership priorities through a directional advisory vote, ensuring we invest your assessment wisely and in ways that reflect community values. The board has the purview to upgrade or make improvements using special assessments, but are limited to a specific annual cap before triggering a member vote. This cap is 5% of the annual budgeted gross expenses and currently represents roughly $350,000 annually for Pine Mountain Club. The board has a sliding scale of options it can consider within this range. This is where the member feedback is invaluable. Your vision shapes our direction. This vote isn't binding, but it's essential. It tells us whether the community prefers a maintenance and functionality approach or supports strategic upgrades that improve member experience. Member sentiment guides how the board navigates within our responsibility and helps prioritize members' financial and amenity interests. Understanding the parameters. What are the financial and physical restrictions we are dealing with? In order to make sound decisions, it's crucial that we are all on the same page regarding the governance impacting our clubhouse facility and our financial decisions overall. There are financial constraints per the Davis-Sterling Act and California Civil Code and California Corporation Code, as well as building code parameters per Kern County. Without understanding these rules, the board cannot proceed responsibly and the members cannot form appropriate expectations of the outcome and the board's actions. Just a quick overview. You have this infographic on the second page of your handout. We will be walking through this piece by piece. There's a lot of detailed information here that we'll be piecing apart through this presentation. What we want to cover, though, what are the financial considerations? Looking at reserve use and restrictions, what falls under board's purview, what requires a member vote. And then on the flip side of that, the physical and county considerations. What are existing building allowances, new code requirements, and then scope and budget limitations. So first, if we look at the first pie wedge of this graphic, reserve items and the parameters around those. A reserve item is an asset the association is responsible for maintaining, repairing, or replacing over time, and that has a predictable remaining useful life and replacement cost. Replacements can include efficiency upgrades and new technology, but must remain like for like in scale and function. The board approves the replacement of each reserve item individually, no blanket approvals. Routine maintenance, minor capital improvements, or special projects do not fall into reserves. These belong in the association's annual operating budget or covered via a small special assessment. Larger capital improvements would need to be set up with a funding plan, disclosed to the membership, and voted on by the members. What I want to call out to the side here, and we'll address this again on another slide, but PMC has a monetary threshold for reserve items and useful life threshold. And currently right now in all reserve items, there is approximately 1.9 million that is due to be replaced. So almost 100 different items have reached the end of their useful life, whether it's a vehicle or the carpet or whatever. That total in all those items is around 1.9 million. That is not the entirety of our reserves. Our reserves are around 5 million, if I'm correct, Randall. 1.9 is what's currently due to be replaced. I'll pause. We're going to do questions at the end when we have a microphone. If you can just note and don't forget it, please. I have a pen if you want to borrow it. What I want to explain here, and why, again, we are taking the time to do these town halls like this, is making sure that we are all on the same page understanding reserves. Because my personal understanding has been educated in the last 6 months alone. From when I first put forward a resolution in June to make sure the membership could vote on the clubhouse in a reserves only scenario, a middle ground scenario, staying under a 5% threshold, and then a larger member vote required scenario. Now knowing best practices for reserve use, we can't guarantee a reserve only clubhouse scenario. You can't do blanket approvals in that capacity. Not appropriate with reserves. Each reserve item needs to be individually approved when we choose to replace it or repair it or use funds from reserves for that item. So there isn't a way to say, okay, we're going to do things only reserves based and no extra spending. The board can't promise that. I can't promise that. It's an individual item by item replacement that each board at that time has to specifically approve. And that board can then decide, do we want a direct reserve replacement, or is there new technology that merits, a slight increase or whatever? So part of this, again, is to understand it does not work to lock in the board to an option A reserves only scenario. There is some fluidity there because, again, each item is approved individually. There is no blanket approval in any scenario, except for large capital improvements, and that's a whole other ballgame. Okay, let's look at the next one. Okay. These are two civil codes that tie into association reserves per Davis Sterling. Civil Code 5510, reserve restrictions. The board shall not expend funds designated as reserve funds for any purpose other than the repair, restoration, replacement, or maintenance of, or litigation involving the repair, restoration, replacement, or maintenance of major components that the association is obligated to repair, restore, replace, or maintain, and for which the reserve fund was established. And then Civil Code 5560, reserve funding plan. The reserve funding plan required for Section 5550 shall include a schedule of the date and amount of any change in regular or special assessments that would be needed to sufficiently fund the reserve funding plan. B, the plan shall be adopted by the board in an open meeting before the membership of the association as described in Article 2, commencing with Section 4900 of Chapter 6. And C, if the board determines that an assessment increase is necessary to fund the reserve funding plan, any increase shall be approved in a separate action of the board that is consistent with the procedure described in Section 5605. Next slide. Part of the reserve criteria specifically for PMC, the replacement value of an item is $5,000 or greater. These are significant existing components that represent substantial investments in our facility infrastructure. The useful life exceeding 1 year up to 30 years. Long-term assets that serve the community over extended periods, not routine maintenance items. Routine maintenance is in our annual operating budget. That is a separate category from reserves. Again, not in the operating budget. Examples of reserve items would include our HVAC system, roofing, pool equipment, and major appliances, the building blocks of facility operations, and capital improvements are excluded. Substantial and discretionary additions, upgrades to the association's common area, components, or materials. A good way to think about this is reserve items are a one-time purchase usually. A vehicle, you're not buying the same vehicle every single year, or putting in, the pool. There's components of that, all that equipment. That's a one-time thing. It will eventually wear out and need replacing. That's what the reserves are there for. The operating budget, that's our annual consumption. That's payroll, that's maintenance of everything, that's our insurance costs. What are we repeating every single year just to run the operation and keep it moving? Okay. Let's now look at special assessments and specifically what falls within the board's purview within the annual budget and how that works. So this really gets into if you're going to be moving walls, expanding the size of an item, or adding new amenities. Those would fall outside of reserve parameters and into special assessments. Per Davis Sterling, there is an annual cap within the board's purview of 5% of the annual budgeted gross expenses. PMC currently, our budgeted gross expenses are slightly over $7 million. And so the 5% annual cap is around $350,000. Some associations do have stricter parameters in their governing documents around capital improvements and member input on those things. Our governing documents do not have that. They don't specify any additional member threshold on voting or approving things within this 5%. And so the governance defaults to Davis Sterling's and Civil Code 5605B. Within our current budget right now, the 5% cap per year comes out to roughly $120 per year per household. That is the amount that the association could potentially, for various special assessment reasons, charge per membership. And that's a tally of items. So it could be one big item, one big purchase, or it can be 5 or 6 smaller items. That tally has to be monitored throughout the year to understand, okay, are we staying underneath that 5% if we're making decisions that are not being voted on by the membership? So there should never be a scenario where you are charged a special assessment that is over 5% without a member vote. And that is something that our community has not been very good about in the past. Okay. Assessment approval requirements for Davis Sterling Civil Code 5605. Annual increases in regular assessments for any fiscal year shall not be imposed unless the board has complied with paragraphs 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 of subdivision B of section 5300 with respect to fiscal year, or has obtained the approval of majority of a quorum of members pursuant to section 4070 at a member meeting or election. This item came up at our first town hall, and I'm glad it did, because it's again demonstrating where we have some misunderstandings about what is actually written in the code and how we're operating. We'll get into the specifics in a second here, but I want to look at both of these pairings, and then we'll dive deeper into section 5300. Civil Code 5605B, this is what speaks directly to the special assessment purview of the board, and then tipping into member vote specifically. If you exceed that, Notwithstanding more restrictive limitations placed on the board by the governing documents, the board may not impose a regular assessment that is more than 20% greater than the regular assessment for the association's preceding fiscal year, or impose special assessments which in the aggregate exceed 5% of the budgeted gross expenses of the association for that fiscal year, without the approval of a majority of a quorum of members pursuant to section 4070 at a member meeting or election. Let's look at our next slide and we'll get into the details here. So this is what we just called back to in 5605A and the requirements under 5300 and what is needed in your annual budget report, which is the third and fourth page of your handout. That is what everyone received in May with your annual budget package mailer, the big fat document that probably sits in your files, as it has in mine. Let's look at what is required in that annual budget statement. 1, a pro forma operating budget showing the estimated revenue and expenses on an accrual basis. 2, a summary of the association's reserves prepared pursuant to section 5565. 4, a statement as to whether the board has determined to defer or not undertake repairs or replacement of any major component with a remaining life of 30 years or less, including a justification for the deferral or decision not to undertake the repairs or replacement. 5, a statement as to whether the board, consistent with the reserve funding plan adopted pursuant to section 5560, has determined or anticipates that the levy of one or more special assessments will be required to repair, replace, or restore any major component or to provide adequate reserves therefore. If so, the statement shall also set out the estimated amount, commencement date, and duration of the assessment. 6, a statement as to the mechanism or mechanisms by which the board will fund reserves to repair or replace major components, including assessments, borrowing, use of other assets, deferral of selected replacements or repairs, or alternative mechanisms. 7, a general statement addressing the procedures used for the calculation and establishment of those reserves to defray the future repair, replacement, or additions to those major components that the association is obligated to maintain. The statement shall include but not be limited to reserve calculations made using the formula described in paragraph 4 of subdivision B of section 5570 and may not assume a rate of return on cash reserves in excess of 2% above the discount rate published by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco at the time the calculation was made. 8, a statement as to whether the association has any outstanding loans with an original term of more than 1 year, including the payee, interest rate, amount outstanding, annual payment, and when the loan is scheduled to be retired. So why this is important is, again, this came up in our first town hall, and the misunderstanding was that if a board wants to special assess for an item, like if we wanted to add something to the clubhouse that is not in reserves, if the board wants to be able to approve it in open session without a member vote, so small-ish item, the misunderstanding was that the board would have had to have said in advance in our annual budget letter, we're going to special assess you for, a dumbwaiter or something. That is not what this language is. This language is specifically talking about if our reserves are not sufficient to cover things that are expiring in that coming year, then the board needs to say, we are going to special assess you to cover reserves for these things that need to be replaced. That's a different category. And it's something that is specifically spelled out in our letter from May. So the argument that we are not in compliance with our financial statements and the information we are giving to the membership is not true. We have been this past May. Perfect example, the letter goes through and cites all of these sections we need to reference. And again, there's a opportunity where if we know far enough in advance that we want to be doing something, yes, we could absolutely give the membership a heads up that we want to assess you this small amount per lot to put in a $50,000 dumbwaiter, to service the restaurant. If we know far enough in advance the plans for that year, we can absolutely include them in your annual budget letter, but that's not the requirement that this code is specifically discussing. Okay. So going back to the topic of just what would be considered under the 5% special assessment cap that the board can work within, here are kind of the pieces that are being considered there. And again, this has to be a case by cases approval, open session with a resolution. These would be strategic improvements that enhance functionality while staying under the current $350,000 annual threshold. What I want to point out again, this 5% is based on each year's annual budgeted gross expenses. If that annual budget changes, this 5% cap changes. If our budget goes down next year, which maybe if we're stacking our savings and really, tightening our belt on things and cleaning things up, this 5% cap will go down because the annual budget will go down. But just again, we're going to use the 5% and the 350,000 kind of interchangeably to just be tracking numbers here, but it's not 350 locked every year. It's the 5% of whatever our budget is every year. Some areas that this could be used for: space optimization, moving or adding walls to improve staff workflow and equipment and storage efficiency, smart expansions, practical upgrades that pay dividends in lifespan and maintenance, extending roof lines to protect patios and reduce siding wear and tear are some initial ideas that are being considered. Multi-use improvements, facility upgrades that enable spaces to serve both members and staff more effectively. For example, could do a better floor in the Condor Pavilion for the fitness classes that are held in here. New amenities, additions not currently in reserves, such as a dumbwaiter for accessibility, small meeting rooms, or fitness areas. I want to hammer this home again. This is the combined total of any such additions. It cannot exceed the 5% of the annual budgeted gross expenses in any given fiscal year, and they must be individually approved in open session. So every single special assessment item will have time on the floor for a debate amongst the board and debate with members, and then has to be approved in open session. There is no just, we're going to buy this thing, send you a bill for it, and it hasn't been talked about publicly. No. Let's look at our last pie wedge, the parameters for large capital improvements and how this tips into requiring a member vote. Again, this is for projects exceeding the 5% cap and requiring membership approval via a secret ballot. This is per Civil Code 5605B that we read, with a majority of a quorum in favor. Loans for any proposed large capital improvements would also need member approval, typically by majority of a quorum, with full financial disclosures and repayment plans must be provided. Specifically for our voting thresholds, our population up here, voting population, lots, 2,904. If we have a 50% quorum of the membership required for capital improvements, that means we need 1,452 participants in an election. Within that, we would then need a majority, 50 plus 1, so 727 to approve a large capital improvement. This is an example of the large-scale capital improvement process. We go through a discovery and desirability phase. Major changes or expansions begin with community input, limited spending justified for cost estimates, but broader work requires approval. A preliminary approval before investing in construction drawings or contractor bids. The board secures member support for the project direction. Financing and formal vote. Projects outside of reserves and exceeding the aggregate of 350,000 or the 5%, whatever that number is each year, require membership vote via a majority of a quorum. Special assessments and loans both need approval per Civil Code 5605B. And a full disclosure. Members receive complete financial impact analysis, loan terms, and repayment schedules via secret ballot procedure. And this is section 5100. Any proposed large-scale improvements follow a transparent, deliberate process that respects both member input and legal requirements. Let's talk quorum for a second. And this again came up from the last presentation and confusion around a quorum and specifically how that impacts PMC's governance, because we have various levels of quorums that we will get into as well. Specifically for large scale capital improvements, this goes back to 5605B. The board may not impose a regular assessment or even a special assessment, which in the aggregate exceeds 5% of the budgeted gross expenses of the association for that fiscal year without the approval of a majority of a quorum of members. Civil Code 4070, approval by majority of a quorum, defined: if a provision of this act requires that an action be approved by a majority of a quorum of the membership, the action be approved or ratified by an affirmative vote of a majority of the votes represented and voting in a duly held election in which a quorum is represented, which affirmative votes also constitute a majority of the required quorum. And the quorum of the membership is the required minimum number of voters present, either in person, by proxy, or by ballot, where the association may conduct business at a membership meeting. So specifically for PMC, we have various levels of how things can be approved. We specifically have a 55% quorum for amending our CC&Rs. And this is not actually just participation. This is participation and the approval that is needed to change the CC&Rs. So the 55% of our overall population of 2,904 is 1,598. And for changing the CC&Rs, we would need 1,598 yeses to change something, not just participation in that vote, but an actual affirmative yes to change something. Our next level is for large-scale capital improvements requiring a 50% quorum. This is, again, if you're going to do anything over the 5% special assessment cap, you have now tipped into requiring a member vote. It's a majority of a quorum, meaning 50% participation just to hold the legitimate vote, and then 51% that need to be in favor of that vote. So again, for a large scale capital improvement, you need to have 1,452 participants, and then at least 727 need to say yes to that capital improvement. For our annual elections is a little different. It's a 25% quorum, specifically for our elections and bylaw amendments. If we don't have the 25% participation, we are not able to ratify any bylaw changes. We have to then hold another election to reach that quorum level. So thankfully, we haven't had this issue probably for the last 20 years, the last 10 at least. We've hit our threshold of our quorum needed. But specifically for this, to amend bylaws, ratify bylaws, make sure it's all buttoned up, we would need at least 25% participating in the election, which is 726. And then you would need a majority in favor of ratifying the bylaw, or the candidates with the most votes then are voted onto the board. And if we don't reach that 25% in an annual election, the second election drops to just approving directors for the board, and bylaws are punted to the following year. And for that, we have a 15% quorum just to be able to keep our board functioning and our governance moving forward each year. And that 15% would be 436 participants, and then whoever gets the most votes would obviously be then put on the board in that scenario. So just to keep in mind, we have, when you hear a quorum, it depends on the context of that vote. CC&Rs are different from capital improvements, different from annual elections and bylaw ratification. Okay, how are we positioning for best practices? We've had a lot of policy, procedure, and bylaw changes the last 2 years, and we're going to walk through those so we're all on the same page. So I know not everyone follows our meetings as diligently as the participants in the meetings. If you are enjoying your life on the mountain, you might not know what's been happening in the last 2 years. So we're going to do a quick run through of what's been going on. Starting in December of 23 with a special meeting, a member initiated changes. Bylaw 6.06, director term limits. Term limits were restored, resulted in 3 directors terming out in June 2024 and 3 new directors elected. Bylaw 1010, carryover of budget surpluses. Original petition to restrict budget surplus use was omitted from special meeting ballot. It was ultimately ratified in June of 2024 and amended again this past March. And what it means now is that surpluses must carry forward to next year's budget. Rule 2211, short-term rental restriction. There was a member petition brought for removal in 2023, but was omitted from special meeting ballot. The rule was deemed an improper restriction on property rights and officially removed in November of 2025. This was our last board meeting. Operational and governance improvements in 2025. February 2025, policy F18, reserve study update. Reserve specialist direction now handled by the annual budget working group, not solely the GM. Specialists must attend final presentation and disclose any disagreements. March 2025, final revision of bylaw 1010. All year-end surpluses must be credited to the next year's assessments. And this was ratified in June of 2025. April 2025, senior operations manager position was added in conjunction with the hiring of a new GM for technical oversight of construction, repairs, and maintenance. June of 25, bylaw 1012, reserve fund management, elevates reserve business policy, which was previously E25, to bylaw level for stronger transparency and protection. And this requires member ratification in June of 2026. And if I'm correct, this bylaw specifically, if it were to be changed in the future, would need a 2/3 majority, not just the simple majority. So there are parameters being put in place to make sure we have the appropriate protections to keep us on a very narrow financial path as an association. September of 25, almost done. A couple things here. We have new legal counsel we're very happy with. And we did interview 5 different firms, all big hitters in the industry, from boutique to Adam Sterling, law group, all very reputable. And Tinley Law Group specifically in their meetings with us told us, we are not going to tell you what you want to hear. You will be told what is legal, which we're very appreciative of. So October 25, bylaw 1013, borrowing limits, prevents loans and financing from bypassing Davis Sterling special assessment protections, and requires member ratification in June of 26. Financial and contracting oversight reforms. May of 25, business policy E1, contracting was revised. This clarifies proper reserve use, requires Form A2 for significant upgrades. Contracts must include documentation and management approvals before board review. Invoice submissions must include full payment history and defined steps when approaching the not to exceed limit. May 25, removal of policy D15, eliminated the GM authority to spend up to $10,000 in unbudgeted funds without limitations. It was a tiny little loophole that was totally unchecked, that is no longer there. And looking forward, we have pending bylaw and policy changes for December 2025, this coming month's board meeting. Amendment of bylaw 10.09, the bistro. This was marked not implemented, but never formally removed. Pending corrections, this will require a member vote in June 2026. Removal of bylaw 1011, special construction fund. also never utilized, will require member vote in June 2026 as well. This fund was a little bit of a weird, not loophole, but it just doesn't really lend itself to transparency, which is why it's being removed. Amendment of bylaws 14.01 and 14.02, effective dates of bylaw changes. This would eliminate the immediate effect bylaw changes. All bylaw changes would take effect only after member approval. Requires member ratification in June of 26. Most of all of these that have come through since our June annual election this year, the current procedure is that they are implemented and can be used, but the membership has not ratified them, which is really weird. So going forward, if the board, which likely will in December, approve the changes to 14.01 and 14.02, would mean any bylaw changes that are proposed by the board and approved, they're in a holding queue until the members ratify them. And then the association implements those into its governance, not the other way around. Amendment of F11 investment policy clarifies policy around secured investment accounts, demands that all cash balances and investments are backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. These are all of our FDIC insured, all of our reserve funds. There's millions sitting there. This is ensuring that everything is backed up and secured and is not at risk if any banking crisis were to happen again. Amendment of policy F19, annual budget process. Limit the working group to 7 members and eliminate director majority. Require documentation of minority opinions in budget formation. And department managers must prepare a zero-based budget this coming year and document review of all reserve components and assets under 5,000, but also over 1,000. We're going to touch on briefly here a review of recent projects and spending from 21 to 25. And these are 3 examples where decisions have fallen outside of best practices and why, again, we need to make sure that we are all on the same page in our governance and our understanding of our governance. The pool, this was an expansion of a reserve item without member approval and inappropriate use of reserve funds. The clubhouse phases 3 through 6, a large-scale capital planning expenditures without first securing member approval, and the post office building purchase, a capital asset purchase above the 5% special assessment cap without first securing member approval. A lack of understanding both at the board level and in the community is our biggest weakness as a community right now. This is really kind of the cornerstone of the frustration and tension that is up here, is we don't understand the parameters. And so our board members are coming in as volunteers, not really knowing how things should work, and our membership does not know how to hold them accountable. And unfortunately, all of these decisions and the volunteer directors involved are protected under the business judgment rule. When decisions are made in good faith, the best interest of the community, and with reasonable inquiry. And this is within Davis Sterling. We cannot expect volunteers to be experts in running an association. This is why governance education is so critical. We do not want history to repeat itself. And I know there's frustration around these items and what is the board doing about it? What can they do about it? Well, we have a pool. We're not going to fill it in. We're going to live with it. Same thing with the post office. We have a building. Any board at any point can look at that asset and say, is this really serving us? Is this useful to us? Or do we want to decide down the line in a different market or a different time, let's sell it at a profit. We don't want the maintenance and the reserve burden on our accounts for this building. Maybe we look at a long-term lease back of the post office area, something. It's now a item that future boards will need to deal with, but it's not something that is going to have any retaliatory action on. There's protections in that for any volunteer directors in that capacity. Decisions are made, We take those decisions, we pick them up, we move on. Same thing with the clubhouse and the 700,000 outlet in the room. There are things that are currently being looked at by this current board. Were they done right? Was money spent in the right places? We still have some questions, but that is executive session content. This board is not at liberty to go into those details because that compromises those confidential conversations. So I would appreciate everyone's understanding that this is something that is being looked at, but is not something that can be discussed in detail in the public right now. Next one. So a recap of the financial considerations into all of this. Reserve items are approved and replaced individually. Non-reserve items can be individually special assessed upon board approval with a combined total not to exceed 5% per year. And upgrades over 5% individually or tipping the tally over 5% require member vote and approval. Let's now talk the physical parameters, specifically from Kern County, looking at what we can do with our clubhouse space and what needs to be considered. We have existing building allowances, new code requirements, and scope and budget limitations. So limited scope for existing buildings. After talking to the county and utilizing the expertise of our senior operations manager, we understand right now that we are locked into our current footprint for the clubhouse and the pavilion. If we exceed that, we then have to go into a whole other parameter of new code seismic requirements for buildings, which is extremely expensive. So if we are going to look at how do we repair, update, fix anything within this space, within the budget caps that we just extensively talked about, we have to stay within our footprint for clubhouse and pavilion. There is also a budgetary cap from the county of 60% of replacement value of your building. If we do too much updating, even in our current footprint, and exceed 60% of our value of our building, we're tipped into new code requirements. And the big concern there, we're not concerned about ADA requirements. I mean, we'll do everything appropriate into code in that capacity. But seismic requirements opens up a whole other can of worms that we honestly can't afford to open. Next slide. So looking at what goes into kind of extensive remodel, I think it's important here to look at building code regulation 17.04.030. I'll read the bottom section, which is the applicable part. If the cost of any repairs, remodeling, or reconstruction thereof, as estimated by the building official, would exceed the 60% we just talked about of the replacement cost of a new structure of similar size and kind, all work shall be in accordance with the applicable requirements of new construction. We have gone down the path a little bit the last couple of years with surveyors and seismic investigation. That's how we learned we couldn't build over the old pool location. We know enough right now that the county would come back to us for this plot, clubhouse and pavilion, and say, okay, if you want to expand this, you likely will not be able to build in this spot, based on our proximity to our fault lines and the code requirements. So again, there's a lot here that locks us in from the county, in addition to our own internal budgeting constraints. Hold your question for the end. Next slide. So county limits by the numbers, staying within the 60% replacement value. The value of our clubhouse and pavilion is around 5 to 6 million. 60% of that is 3 to 3.6 million. These are critical considerations. Reserve items are included in the county's calculation, and any special assessment upgrades approved by the members. So what this means, we don't just have internal spending restrictions, but also county budget restrictions on improvements. A recap of our restrictions in all of these considerations. Here are the boundaries we must work within. We cannot tie the hands of future boards. There's no mass approval. Reserve funds used for reserve items only. The board can special assess up to 5% of budgeted gross expenses with open session approval for an item. An item tipping the scale over the 5% requires member vote. We must stay within building footprints or trigger new seismic code requirements. We must stay under 60% replacement value or also trigger new seismic code requirements. With all of this information, what are the options for proceeding with the clubhouse and pavilion? So option A, this is reserve item replacements and essential improvements. This direction aims to stay as close as possible to reserve items only, while still allowing the board to make necessary improvements for efficiency, functionality, and longevity with minimal special assessments. How I would think about this is looking at decisions that are critical to our operations, whether it's functionality, whether it's the materials or arrangement of the facility. How do we do our best with what we have? Versus an option B that we'll talk about, which is more of a, what would be nice to have? What are new things that would make this a better facility, better experience for our membership? That's a separate category. Option A is looking at how can we stay as close to reserves as possible, but also not tie the hands of the board to do their job and do it well. Examples, while replacing office carpet and paint, but also move staff around and add walls to maximize existing space. The additional walls would be small special assessments. Walls are not in reserves. So if we wanted to rearrange our staff, maybe downsize pro shop, put some staff there, make that a functional space, putting walls in like that to make that happen, that's a small special assessment, not a reserve item. Okay. Option B, strategic upgrades within board purview and open session approval. Looks to maximize improvements and nice to have upgrades that can be made within the 5% special assessment cap and open session approval, but not to exceed this restriction. Again, looking at the worst case scenario cost per household, this is $120 per year. Very likely this would fluctuate somewhere under $120, depending on what projects are approved each year. Example, putting in floor to ceiling windows overlooking the golf course. That would be a nice to have. That is not a need to have. If our membership comes back and the majority decision is saying, I'm on a budget, the economy is horrible, I need to really live within a very strict margin here, I want A, the board does not put in floor to ceiling windows. They could propose that, a director could propose it, resolution, put it on the floor for debate for the board, and our membership can come back up and say, nope, sorry, you have the voting numbers. You know a majority who participated in that vote want reserves and very strict spending here. We don't have the bandwidth for nice to haves right now. This is how we have the checks and balances. Each individual item has to be presented to the board, whether it's using a reserve expenditure and replacing that or a special assessment outside of reserves. Every single item comes to the board for open session approval and open debate with the membership. And then the board is held accountable to what does the membership want, and has to be able to stand up there and say, either I support my membership and I'm voting for something or against something, or I'm not supporting the membership. And they have to own that publicly. There is no behind closed doors, just buy something and put it in. Every single item has to be approved in open session. A couple other examples. If we wanted to add a multi-purpose floor in the pavilion or the clubhouse for the fitness classes, maybe put in a wall of mirrors in that space for all the fitness classes. There are ample ways that we can improve the space for the membership if that's a direction the membership wants to go. What I do want to just footnote here, the last couple member surveys from 21 to 24, there was still momentum for a gym space. There will be county restrictions to do that. And so that again has to be considered. Can we even do it? We don't know. We'll look into it, but it also needs to align with what the membership wants and making sure that we are compliant with the county. Lastly, option C, extensive remodel. This requires a binding member vote. This scenario tips over into requiring an official membership vote and presents a number of unknown costs and outcomes based on compliance with current county building codes, both for structural requirements and most significantly, our proximity to the fault lines. Our next steps. We will be emailing out this presentation and a survey link to do a vote with. The association has emails for 2,585 lots, plus the ability to reach members on Facebook and the current website. This will be highly marketed over the next week and a half. What you will need in order to access this is your member ID. That's your first 7 digits, not the 0 numbers on the end. And then you will need the first and last initial of the primary member on title. So example, my husband is that. So his initials, not my initials. And there will be parameters noted in the survey for if your property is under an LLC or a trust or something. We're doing this so the planning committee has the ability to vet entries for duplication and authenticity, but not know who you're voting or who you are or how you're voting. You'll make your selection between options A, B, and C. And again, there will be detailed information reminding you what those options mean within all this framework that we've just been talking about. And then we will end the voting December 12th so that planning can review entries at their meeting on the 13th. And the December board meeting will announce the direction the community would like to go so that our senior operations manager can get a jump start on taking care of our facility and not deferring things any further than they need to be. So I appreciate everyone's patience the last 6 months in trying to get all the appropriate, accurate information compiled so that we are all on the same page in this decision making, and so that the board understands their boundaries they have to work within, and the membership also understands how to hold the board accountable in these decisions. We're trying to course correct things that have been in process for almost a decade, and it's been 6 months. So we're doing our best effort here to steer us into a path of transparent best practices and put up the guardrails going forward so we don't have repeats of large scale expenditures that don't have member input. I think our last slide. Okay, let's take some time and we can do questions. If you want to come up and grab a microphone, George can hand it out. Okay, perfect. We want to make sure everyone can hear it in the recording. And if you want to just raise your hand, I'm happy to take questions for the next 15, 20 minutes. Yes. Hold for the mic. Hold on.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. On option A, it can only come from the reserves, and the reserves have 1.9 million. Yet the cost for all these changes is 3.6 million.
So let's talk numbers for a second again, because there is some confusion that you're having, so we can clarify that.
Right, that's what I want to clarify. Okay, so how do we get the other 2 million?
So overall reserves, every item that the association is in possession of that is over $5,000 and that has a longer useful life than 1 year. That tally, currently in reserves, we have around $5 million. Not everything on that list expires in the same year. So it's a running cycle of what is going to come due for replacement each year. So you're not going to use your $5 million every single year. You're going to come up on items that have expired that need replacing. Because of the deferred maintenance in our clubhouse and pavilion, we have a backlog of items that are very visibly wearing out and falling apart. That is the 1.9 million. There are around 96 items that have a dollar amount assigned to them. And that dollar amount, those 96 total 1.9 million. So if we wanted to go ahead, 3.6 is a budgetary cap from the county. It's not what we're suggesting we spend. It's a electric rail that we don't want to cross. Because if we exceed that 3.6 million, say for example, we wanted to do some larger project in one fell swoop, 2 years, tear down the pavilion, put something new in, you know, if we exceed that 3.6, the county is going to come back and say, oh, you need to do all this other seismic code requirement stuff. So the 3.6 is a number that we don't want to exceed. It's not what we're suggesting that we spend, but it's something that we have to be watching in terms of our tally the next couple of years, because the county will be looking at what permits do we have open with them and what construction is happening. And they will be saying, okay, are you staying within 60% of your replacement value of your facility? So the 3.6 is the 60% of what our space is valued at. So that is from the county, a budget cap that we don't want to tip and exceed, because then it opens up all this seismic parameter stuff that we don't want to have to get into. It's very expensive. So why there is no specific budget per item right now is because, again, or per option, sorry, is every single piece will have to be approved by the board. There is no blanket, we plan to spend $2 million and do all of these things, and the membership can say yes to this. We wouldn't be able to honor that. Each individual item, reserves roof, reserves carpet, special assessment, dumbwaiter. Each individual item has to go to the board, and that individual board, as a body, has to decide, do we replace this thing right now? Or do we buy this new thing? Or do we defer it or wait or don't do it? So there's no way to lock in, oh, we're going to do a $2 million renovation. Can't do that. Each piece has to be individually approved by the current sitting board. And the way that we stay within budget parameters is that the board cannot spend more than $350,000 in this current year on anything outside of reserve. Does that clarify your question?
Yes, that brings me to another question.
Yes.
On option B, the way I heard it was that these improvements up to 5% or 350K can be made by the board with no vote.
No
If
vote
it's-
of the membership. Yeah.
Right, with no vote. So they can spend 350.
Mhm.
Okay.
Worst case.
Everything else would be special assessment.
It's twofold. You have your annual normal assessment that's due every July. That covers the operating costs of the association and a portion to fund reserves so that reserve items are taken care of. Any item added outside of reserves under that 5% threshold would be a special assessment, but does not require a member vote. So for example, we will look a little bit at the post office, because this was, again, poor communication, because I had certain assumptions. I wasn't on the board yet. And as a member, I was like, okay, I'm waiting for a bill. The appropriate way to have bought the post office, if the association really wanted to have that building and not have to deal at the time with a member vote to do it would have been needing to negotiate the price of that building under the 5% cap. So they could have had a one item that year that falls under the board's purview to buy, essentially. You would then get a bill for your portion of that purchase. That would be your special assessment. But because it's under the 5%, the member vote is not necessary to do that.
So we could get a special assessment on board approved things and what we vote for special assessment. So we're paying our $2,000 a year assessment plus special assessment that the board is now approving over and above our yearly assessment.
Correct.
Plus special assessment as deemed, by the members if they vote for it. And how much of those how much can be assessed? I mean, one project can cost a lot of money.
That large member vote component is not really on the table, because if you look at what's required, the majority of a quorum, you have to have 1,400, and I think it's 52 or 52 participants in an election. We have never come close to that turnout for an election. So even if someone wanted to propose, we're going to, buy another building and it exceeds that 5%, it's almost near impossible we'd have the member turnout to even hold the vote for that. So that is where that kind of voting special assessment is honestly not on the table, because we don't have the member participation to even approve it.
So you're saying that the board wants to stay under the 350, which would mean $120 per lot, if that happened.
If that were to happen. So here's an example. Right now, looking at what is due to be replaced in the building, reserve items, looking at a construction timeline for how do we approach this, what's urgent, what falls seasonally, what can we work on during the wintertime versus the summertime. So 2 examples. If we say we start with the roof and the siding replacements on the clubhouse and pavilion, we have in reserves funds allotted for the current square footage of those 2 things. So there is a scenario where the board could say, okay, we want to keep the siding as it is and the roof footprint as it is. And that is completely covered in reserves. There is no additional cost there. But maybe there is a consideration for, on some of our building areas, the siding does not go all the way down to the ground. It covers part of the building. If we want to expand the square footage of a reserve item like that, we have to consider, okay, what does that cost? It might be that materials are less now and we can actually expand the square footage and stay within the monetary amount allocated in reserves. So it's a win-win. There's no added, expense there. There's a possibility though that expanding our siding could be, say, a 5% increase in the cost to do it. We can allocate the appropriate amount of reserves. That's appropriate. Special assess the 5% in excess. The board does not need a member vote to do that. The board in open session can decide it's worthwhile to the maintenance cost, longevity of our building, whatever, to assess this, to exceed this amount by 5%. And that 5% we now need to ask the membership, to pay for. So that could potentially be, I don't know, quick math is not my thing, but maybe the total amount of it is $50,000 and we're looking at, I don't know, is that a $40 assessment, $20 assessment? Smaller math. But that would be an example of something where it falls within, again, the board's purview to make that decision. And again, have to justify publicly why they would make that decision. And then there would be a bill to the members. Here is your portion to cover this piece that is outside of reserves. But again, there is the budgetary Davis Sterling cap. The board has to stay under that 5%. Otherwise, again, it does tip into member approval. And the current budget right now with 7 million overall, 5% of that, the 350, that is $120 per lot cap. You could not be assessed more than that. Again, I don't foresee us even coming close to that, honestly, because again, timeline of construction and when things happen is going to draw out over a couple years. But it's also not just limited to the clubhouse. It's an overall association cap. So if we had something else come up, say on the golf course or something, or Lambkin Park, where there's something that needs to be done and it doesn't qualify as an operating expense and it's not covered in reserves, that could be a special assessment item that is considered in the overall tally. So again, in the planning of the clubhouse and the pavilion, we even have to still kind of keep a buffer there so that if something were to come up, the association can still operate effectively and handle things effectively and not exceed that 5%. Did that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
Yes, on?
Yes.
Yeah, a couple of things you said that I disagree with. One, that there was no accountability for those board members. Actually, the members ran a recall. That was the accountability. Okay.
And that is the power of the membership.
Correct. It was the members
Yes.
who recalled those members.
This is again, I want to expand on that. Why again this vote is this advisory vote is very important to kind of chart the direction of where the association would like the membership to go, is so that we have a cornerstone to anchor our decisions back to. So we're not just kind of flying blind as a board to say we want this or we want to do this. It's no, membership has spoken, they would like this direction on things.
I understand the advisory vote. In reality, I don't think it cuts to what this association, after being swindled by the previous board members, all that money that was authorized, beginning with the pool, and the last one is the post office. I think the association owes that money to the members. And we still have 5 years statute of limitation to get that the association to do the right thing. In terms of the quorum, there are plenty of case law where that quorum is decreased by a judge because the 50%, as you said, is very difficult to accomplish. And there is case law that refutes that idea that you cannot get that quorum to run in case of a capital improvement. Good faith and bad faith. There were plenty of arguments during the decisions that the previous board has done. Specifically, just one thing you said about the fall, there were articles in the newspaper. There were owners who had the actual technical knowledge about it. That board decided to go ahead. So that, for me, is the definition of bad faith. So there are plenty of bad faith to go after the previous board members who actually owed the members a lot of money back. That's it.
And again, that's potential litigation, and that's an executive session topic. Yes, Finn.
Thank you. I'm obligated to say that I'm not speaking on behalf of government docs. So it's my personal opinion. I really would, you made a great presentation. I thank you for that. I'm sure a lot of members are not aware of all the things you said. I would appreciate if we came up with, and maybe that's a second meeting, but came up with a list of things that needs to be done. If it's covered under our reserves, or if it's not, what do we need to do? I mean, we're all sitting here looking at this disastrous room. It's a disgrace. And we all know that has to be fixed. We know there are things that have to be fixed. I think you said there are 93 items. It would be great to have a list of maybe the top 20 that you're going to do first.
What I would like us to have, and this is in the works, and again, part of this is trying to bring membership up to speed with the board to understand what we're working within. But what Bob Wyatt has been working on that I've been hounding him for and nudging is a construction timeline in order of what needs to be done to understand both a scenario of option A, what do we do staying close to reserves, versus if we wanted to add things in, where would they fall in that construction timeline? Because it won't be you do all reserve things and then you do all new things. That's not how construction works. So Bob is in the works. We're looking at all of this. What are kind of the first chapters and phases based on a conservative scenario? What are next steps on a, we'll call it an optimizing scenario? What could be added into that during that appropriate time? And how do we start to roll out this information once we know, again, all the parameters, all the reserve use that has not been well adhered to in the past? We don't want to make that mistake again. So understanding what are all the components, what is the money allocated for that, what is the construction schedule to do those things, and then where do we layer in any improvements that might be desired if membership comes back with a B option in support of.
Okay, sounds good.
It's in the works, yes.
Do you have a timeline for when you think you can come up with when your plan?
I mean, I would love to be laying out kind of next steps in January.
Great.
Bob is chomping at the bit. Like,
Okay,
can I please
great.
do this? Can I please do it?
Let's do
One
it.
thing that I have really made sure and hounded about is I think it's very important that we have this conversation and understand these parameters before we start tearing anything out. Because if we go that route and we're not articulating to the membership what next steps are and what direction we're pointed, there is not the trust right now to say, oh, sure, you'll stay to reserves only. It could very easily be misconstrued as, oh my goodness, you're tearing the roof off. You're going to do a whole big Taj Mahal. No, we need to understand what are the parameters? How do we do this appropriately? What are the checks and balances? And then here are the pieces we're going to move forward with based on membership direction they'd like to go.
Okay.
So I held off on any maintenance things. It's like, no. We need to have everyone on the same page first. So as soon as possible.
Looking forward to a plan.
Thank you, Finn. Paul in the back, you can grab the microphone.
Good evening. Thank you very much for this thorough, comprehensive presentation. We're now over 70 minutes into this,
Oh, man.
and I would like to note that there's only 25 of the 2,500 lots present in this meeting. I would encourage these type of meetings to be more like a town hall than Candace lecturing us and educating us. The people you have here are highly likely motivated. They may have sat through the previous session, and you've done a great job explaining, but you're after feedback. 3 people have been allowed to question. That's insufficient. When I have a question because I want to clarify something that you said, I don't get to do it until 70 minutes into the conversation. This is a structural feedback to you right now because I'm not in 8th grade, okay? We're adults. We're motivated. We need to have real town halls. And I appreciate this. I'm just giving you some feedback right now.
No, it's helpful. This is in somewhat of a reaction to the first town hall because we did have an ongoing.
And I sat through that at home just to educate yourself. So I have a simple question.
Just,
Pardon? Okay.
This is twofold. There's intention here. The prior town hall has had over 200 views on YouTube. So even though there might be a small participation rate in person, our meetings are having a lot of traction online, which is very helpful to know. Members are seeing what's happening. They are following what's going on.
More feedback,
Exactly.
real quick. Let me, I have the mic, is
Yes.
that okay? I get what you're saying. The surveys, we had a survey in 23 and
In 24.
24. It finished in 24. We didn't get any results presented to us for over a year. And I'm curious as to, this survey has 3 questions. It will finish on the 12th, and then the planning meeting will get their results on the 13th, and that is immediate. That's amazingly compared to what we sat through for a year on that 3-year survey. I would highly recommend, my commentary is this, try to give these short surveys every year.
Totally agree.
Every year. We have members moving in, moving out all the time. You're doing a great job of educating us today, but that's just one stake in the ground. We need to have a membership move to a higher educated level.
Understanding, for sure.
Okay, so that's my feedback. My questions to you is simply on the numbers. And I'll write a question that you could follow up, because I forgot what the specific question I had when I wanted to ask it.
Send it to the board email, pmcboard@pmcpoa.com.
Right.
And any questions, follow-up questions, we will include it like we do now for our monthly board recap email.
Okay.
Or there are questions, we will answer those and they go out to the membership. So
Thank you.
email us, yes.
The thing that I had a real quick question is the number 1.9 million. Bob, maybe you can answer this. All those line items that exceeded their life, or theoretically 96 items. Some are probably still okay. Some are, we'll wait until the thing breaks and then we'll replace it. My question to you is, I may get this wrong. There's 6 million actually funded reserves. Let me clarify. There's 1.9 that need to be taken care of or have 100% of devaluation on the books. So I'm curious as to $120 a month.
Can I answer
Trying
part
to
of it?
get some clarification on this.
Can I answer part of this? So I think we'll just a little snapshot of reserves. As of last month, we had 5 million and something in our reserve bank account. That does not mean that each item has its full funds to be replaced right now. As of May, when our letter went out that's included in your packet, our reserves were 63% funded. So again, not everything is expiring in the same year. We have around 1.9 million worth of things that are due to be replaced kind of right now. And a portion of those, it kind of expands the whole complex. There's the tennis courts and stuff like that need, repair and stuff. So there's a portion of that money that is applicable to use for the clubhouse right now. Meaning we're not trying to change things out that still have 5 years life on them. Because there are some things where we're like, okay, we're going to be here. Our family motto is we're here, let's do it. Let's replace things in a construction sequence that makes sense, so we're not going back and tearing things out and putting new things again and repeating ourselves. So there's a chunk of money that is applicable to the clubhouse right now that would allow us to take care of things with items that are expired and have the funds for them. That answer?
Yeah, let me ask the question that is in the room. And reserve funds were used for a street sweeper. In that specific case, it was funded for, replaced as they did. But the value of that street sweeper compared to something else that could have been done, there may be some real questions. I sweep my own street in front of my house. And that street sweeper certainly doesn't do a very good job. And it certainly was a waste of capital money to do that. We see that. We see it all. We believe that this board and Bob and the new management are good stewards, and things like that won't happen again. I believe that.
This is why, again, I cannot stand up here and say you can have a reserve only option, because that abuses our reserves. If we're going to fudge criteria and what is budgeted for reserves versus what is used for reserves, that's just stealing from ourselves. The street sweeper is a perfect example. Okay, the item itself is a reserve item. For whatever reason, it had to be replaced. Board at that time was told your only option is this said option, and it was costing double what was allocated in reserves. And there was not enough understanding, both at the board level at that time and the membership as well, to say, can't do that. You need to either find that money, the remainder, in operating, which we shouldn't have that kind of money sitting around in operating if we're doing our job well and keeping our actual operational budget strict to what it needs to be. So that really shouldn't be an option, to dip into operating to cover excesses like that. That would be a special assessment. And the board would have to decide, is it really worth special assessing and asking the members for more money? If it's all lumped into reserves, it just steals from the next item down the list that will need to be replaced, which is why, again, cannot honestly bind a board and the expectation of the membership to a reserves only scenario. There are going to be items in the clubhouse that merit a percentage exceeding their reserve allotment. And that is part of the good stewardship of how the board needs to look at, what are we maintaining? What are we replacing? What makes sense? Is it worth assessing for, or is it not worth assessing for? So these are all things that we are now compiling and adding into our kind of toolbox of consideration. And agree with you, yes, this is required annual education. Like board orientation, honestly, having gone through 2 of them now, should be 3 days. And part of what this presentation is going to be is a chunk of that orientation. Because if every director had this framework going into their term, it's a very, very different governance for this community than what we've had in the past. Use the mic, please.
Lastly, I would just like to say thank you. I would encourage you do another town hall like this and a survey in the month of May. We're right on Christmas holidays. We're right here, and this is not a good time to be asking that question. I'm going to get my COLA, so I will be paying attention to my nickels and dimes a lot more than most. But my concern is, if you have questions for the new board, that's the time to get those surveys out there. So that's my 2 cents.
And this is something that planning is looking at in the future as well. They've gone through the process now of a full, like, very massive survey, and it's not functional for the membership, for the committee, for digesting information. A lot of what we're trying to do now at a board level and encourage at a committee level is looking at, why are we doing things and why are we doing them a certain way? And do we have to do it that same way again? And that is something that is definitely on planning's radar, to look at, how do we engage our membership and communicate with them and gain insight from them without this massive time-consuming undertaking. So it's been noted for sure. I have 2 questions in the front here. I've got Russ and Beth. Oh, sorry. Yes, Leslie.
Hi. To finish, or just to support what Paul was saying about a timeline, or also about putting off any kind of a membership vote, is pretty sensible to me, because we're still thinking about that 1.9 in a general summary way, yet there, I believe, are inventory, inspection reports, and there are the budget reports and the budget reserves and all of those things. Once we can look at them and see them and discuss them, then we would have a fuller picture of what that 1.9 is. And then instead of, when Finn had asked for maybe 20 of those line item type of things, I'd say give it all. And let's wait for all. And then we can all, have another town hall meeting with more data.
So the
And
one-
then we can go forward and have maybe a survey. But I just really wanted to emphasize that I think some of the information is there, and you guys have done a lot of work, and I don't believe that that anything is going on. I just want to know, is it appropriated in the right way? Because, like you were saying, in the past, it hadn't been. So we just want to make sure that we are all on the same page going forward. That's my.
So part of why this has taken us a little longer is the last 6 months, we have been doing a massive cleanup of reserves. And that's been extensive to look at what was kind of blindly put in or not put in by the last reserve specialist and why we ditched that specialist in that company. There's been extensive cleanup, and that was presented and approved in November's board meeting. Part of the timeline of this too is there's, again, pre-planning that has to happen from a permitting perspective. There are a number of pieces that have to land kind of regardless of outcome that we want to be considering in all of this, also leading into our budget formation process for next year. So there are various factors that apply to this conversation today and why we're trying to do this. There's information and steps kind of waiting in the wings to weigh in on all of this that needs member input. So again, we don't want to be deferring this really any later. We'll finish in the back and then come to the front. Sorry, guys.
Hi, big ship you guys are turning around. Thank you for all the work you guys are doing. I have kind of an ADHD question here because I'm not clear. The special assessments, 350K is what we're talking about, 5%. Is that like a cap overall? Or so say 350K is 7 special assessments at 50,000 each? Or is it possible that you can have 2 special assessments that are 300,000 each, even though, so it's 350 total at this point in time, 350 total for the year?
Think of it like a bucket.
Got it.
You can fill that bucket with however many things you want to 350. Anything that spills over that bucket now has to get voted on.
Got it.
Which again is why it's important that we don't actually max out that bucket, because there may be things, unexpected costs or something that come up that the board that's not in operating, not budgeted for, it was an unexpected thing, the association would need to assess for, that is not optional. There has to be the bandwidth there to still take care of business. So again, we're educating on kind of the parameters here, but this is not the cap that we are trying to max out with the clubhouse.
And then another quick question. Option A, B, and C, if I'm correct, A is just reserves only in that 96 line item. And then B is reserves and some special assessment stuff here and there. And then C is kind of the new Barbie house that will most likely never happen because the quorum can't be reached.
Think of A as kind of reserves plus necessary items.
Got it.
For example, one item could be a solution to our restaurant issues and our liability of going up and down the stairs with staff is a dumbwaiter. That could be a potential thing that would seem as a necessary item, not a nice to have, but a solve the restaurant problem. It's not currently in reserves.
So kind of like reserve
Critical.
plus critical special assessments. Got it.
Yes. And then B is more of a like nice to have things. They're not necessary, but nice to have.
And C?
Is almost unattainable based on the membership vote requirement.
Barbie house. Hey, thank you.
Thank you both for waiting patiently. I'm sorry.
Candace, this has been really good. Again, like Finn, I'm not speaking on behalf of governing docs, but I do want to say that my experience so far this year being on governing docs is that it's really important, first of all, to have a constant education of the board membership, because that's how we hold the board accountable. And that the more gray area we eliminate so that all of us understand that, the less likely the board in now or in the future will go off the rails. And so not only educating us, but assuring that we have the guardrails in our documentation to make sure that what's happened in the past won't happen again. So I just want to continue to encourage that. I had a couple of questions. One of them on the 5%, is that 350K, is that encapsulated with an annual budget year?
Yes. So in terms of like accumulating items that are applicable to that cap, like the timeline for it?
Right, like you would do it and pay for it in 1 year, one budgeting year.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, and then
And that's July 1 to June 30th. So for example, if Bob were really speedy with the county to get our roofing permits and siding permits or something, and we could bang those out in the spring, and if we were to exceed those reserves by a percentage or something, there could potentially be 2 small special assessments in this current fiscal year.
Mhm.
And then July 1, that tally starts over. That's your next year. So
the roof wouldn't continue into year 2.
no, it's a one-time expenditure approval. The construction could potentially overlap.
Right, I get that, yeah.
Cost, yes. And one thing too with the cap, you cannot split an item over years to try and avoid this threshold.
Right,
For example, if you had a $400,000 item, you can't start with 200,000 in your first year and stay under that cap and then do the second 200,000 second year. It's the item in its entirety has to stay under that 350.
yeah, that was the problem with the $10,000 general manager approval, yeah. The other thing was,
Small scale, yes.
yeah, on a smaller scale, cost overruns. Does the board have a value that it gives that, like, we'll anticipate 10% cost overruns, but let's say it runs over 35%. So it goes way over what you guys anticipated. How do you deal with that?
That would be hard because again, you're approving each item individually.
Mhm.
So there needs to be, and it's not just, oh, we're going to approve the roof and now here's a blank check.
Mhm.
Every resolution that comes to the board has to have backup documentation that shows what you're looking at, either various materials and pricing of materials and quality and what those pricings are and all of that. If you are where you could have maybe a contingency is if you're considering options, and it's not really a contingency, it's a not to exceed amount. So slightly different example, but one we're recently dealing with right now, locking in a contract for our inspector of elections. We had 4 bids. We had a various price range from each 4, but also various criteria we were considering that was not locked in when the board wanted to approve that contract.
Mhm.
So what the board did last month was to say, okay, we are delegating the authority to our GM to sign for an inspector of elections, but they need to meet this 4 criteria and a not to exceed amount. So that gave kind of the contingency of this is going to be in excess.
Yeah, I get
Because we've
that.
done the homework as well to say, these are the bids, these are the different parameters we want within this service. We know the range. So again, there isn't really a project or construction contingency like you would normally see because
Like a
that's a
10% or
bigger,
something.
broader, overarching
Mhm.
thing when you're tasking a contractor to say, hey, come build me a whole building. And they have to factor in all these other considerations, subcontractors, materials, shipping, all of these things. When you're approving line item by line item, you're locking things in much quicker and in the moment. So there really shouldn't be 10%, 35%. You might have slight allowances for not to exceeds. But again, that even still has been reined in significantly because that was also abused in the past as well, both by contractors and their services, but also by just the lack of internal accounting controls in the past, where when checks were being presented to be signed or something, there was not a tally of, okay, this is an overall contract, say for $100,000. What have we already paid out of that 100,000? Are we close to our not to exceed limit? That was not in place the last few years. So there are accounting parameters internally that are being used now to make sure we are staying within the appropriate boundaries of what is approved in open session resolution.
You didn't quite answer my question because the unanticipated cost of something that you're doing, that no matter how well you planned it, you still had a cost overrun.
That would be where I would consider leaving a margin within that 5% cap. Because yes, there might be things that come up, but it's not just that they'll get paid because we have a margin. They still have to come to the board for approval in resolution. And to say, here's a perfect example, not here, but one our reserve specialist told us in a kind of our educational process. There was a building downtown that was replacing, what was it? It was a high rise, tons of floors, like 24 floor building, sorry. And I believe it was maybe something, what was it? Their balconies or something they were replacing. They couldn't fit the equipment in the elevator. They had to be hand carried up all these floors. They needed scaffolding for part of this, had to be hand carried up the floors. That year, that was an unanticipated cost to replacing a reserve item. It still has to be approved by the board in open session. And hopefully in that situation, they hadn't exceeded their 5% cap and they could pay for it without a vote and get stuck mid-project, with no balconies. But what they've done now, just side note, that association has now allocated in their reserves the labor and equipment needed to replace the balcony. So there's nuances there a little bit. But again, it's a budgeting consideration and a planning consideration, construction-wise, of what's being done, what do we anticipate maybe needing some special assessment funds, and are we within a margin to make sure we're not going to fill that bucket entirely.
So kind of your answer is you're not going to allocate the whole 5%. You're going to try and have a mindset of leaving enough margin for cost overruns.
We would have to.
Okay. The other thing is, and I don't want to dominate this, Mike, but the reserves on an annualized basis, are the reserves limited to some amount of money based on our budget? So let's say that you had 90 items to fix and they're $1.7 million, but we only have $1 million allocated this year for reserve spending.
That would be what is out. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. That is an example of what is outlined in section 5300, where if an association in their annual budgeting process goes through everything and sees, ooh, we have a replacement heavy year and we don't have the funds in reserves to cover this, that is the point in time when the association would say, we need to have a special assessment and it needs to be noted in that budget letter. You're not really going to come across that very frequently if you are keeping the right controls in place. Reserves are reviewed every single year. There is input from internal management and expertise on the status of items. Are they actually expired at their useful life? Have they expired early maybe? Can they be extended later? That's an annual consideration internally. Then every 3 years, you have an outside review specialist looking at all this as well, doing another physical walkthrough of all those pieces. So if you are appropriately setting aside a amount of funds every year as part of the annual special assessment, which we do, it's in that letter, you are setting aside funds to cover these things. If you are tracking the useful life of everything and also doing your due diligence in your maintenance, you should be staying on track to replace those things and have the funds to do it.
Is there any headspace on that amount of money? Like there's $120K per household for the 5%. But if the reserve gets screwed up, is there any like amount that's limited to, or could you just hit us with a $500 a year assessment or something?
This, I believe, and Randall can correct me, would fall into the 20% that is allowable in your annual assessment. In general, that 20% is looking at the operational costs and consumptions. So for example, we were very lucky this year and our insurance actually came down overall. Our broker was able to negotiate around $47,000 in savings. So this was not an issue, but who knows? In California's fire climate, there's potential for our insurance to come back and say, "Oh, we're now doubled." And your premium is not 500,000, it's $1 million. There is the allowance. We don't ever want to do this, but there is the allowance to raise the annual assessment up to 20% to offset that, because it is a operating cost. We can sidebar, Leslie. Leslie, you're not using a microphone, Leslie. Leslie, we have a code of conduct for our town halls. We will not be arguing and shouting. The assessment is the overall the assessments, your annual assessment, that amount is the overall operating budget of the association. That is all costs that it takes to run the association. Admin costs are not excluded from that. Insurance, all of the premiums we pay, that is part of the operation of the association. We are required to have insurance coverage for these things. But Beth, going back to your question, that would be an example of needing to fund the assessment, and there is a cap there of 20% for the operational side. Russ, I'm sorry to leave you hanging here.
I grew a beard with this simple question. Could you repeat the date that you said that the ballots are going to be counted?
Planning will close the survey Friday the 12th.
It's coming up
It
mighty
will be,
quick.
it will be a link that we will be sending out frequently and marketing and hounding.
Okay, but is this some kind of final thing or just the quick December
It's-
thing for this year?
It's a directional input from the membership. Because we are at
Will it happen again later? I fear if there will be low participation. It's already going to be the middle of December. So I'm asking you, is
I get
is
that.
what you're doing in the middle of this month going to happen again later for more input?
The input is allowed to happen for every single item that's being considered. So there's no, the input from the survey does not lock any decision. It can't, not a binding vote.
Okay, I'm hoping for simple answers and brevity because this is my feedback for you. You're very educated and intelligent, and it's refreshing to talk to somebody for a change that I can say that about. But we don't need an exhaustive answer for every simple answer. Please, yes or no. Is there going to be
There's-
another survey later, or is this it?
Probably not.
So this is it.
This is it.
Wow.
We're going to be marketing and pushing the heck out of it to get input. Same with this presentation, going out with it. There's been,
Okay, then my feedback,
yes,
for whatever it's worth, it's too
Mhm.
late. Bad timing. I would have done it in spring. I think by mid-December, there's going to be a total tizzy of people thinking about other things. Next question.
I get that.
Regarding the footprint,
Mhm.
I would, based on what you said, we have to stay within this footprint or open our giant cans of expensive worms. We're not going to do that. I would say is it safe to assume whatever we do is not going to change the footprint?
We can't. We would need a member vote to do it.
Okay,
Be like a binding, actual formal secret
Okay.
ballot vote to
so
do.
what about going taller
You
in the
can't.
same footprint?
You can't. There are county parameters. If you start changing your foundation and your lateral flooring, everything, it tips into new code requirements. So
That's true normally with stick built, but this is post and beam.
from the county's feedback, if we want to stay in our spot and not trip new code, we have to stay within our current floors and footprint.
Including square footage. You could not add a third story half of this footprint, put it on the post and beam bearing walls. You cannot increase footprint or square footage.
Correct.
That would be the simple way to say it.
Sorry, my assumption is that your footprint is your square footage.
There's no, a footprint is a footprint at the foundation. It could go 2 stories, 3, 4, 5, 24.
The code specifically does lay out even if you change,
Okay.
if you were to change your foundation significantly, even within your footprint, that will also trip new code seismic requirements.
Okay, gotcha. Last question, hoping for a simple answer, but it's a big question.
I'll try.
An advisor told me that if this whole town burned down, as paying members, as members of the association, we would collectively be liable for the cost of recreating all of the value of the $5 or $6 million of POA property. Is that true?
So my understanding, we have insurance. The association is insured for its properties and assets. And that includes fire insurance for our properties and assets.
Yes,
So
yes. As someone whose house burned down, I can tell you 90-something% of policies are underrated. People are underinsured.
I believe that.
I don't know how much you are insured for, but I doubt it's twice what these buildings would cost to actually replace now.
I don't know the number off the top of my head. We had like,
Okay,
I think 18 policy pieces that were reviewed this fall. So I don't know the number specifically, but we do have insurance for that. I would want to have someone else weigh in on, are the members on the hook for replacing all of that? Because again, we do have insurance for it.
I'm going to ask it in an even simpler way.
I might not know the answer still.
If this town is wiped out, and the insurance is insufficient to properly do replacement cost coverage in the modern age, modern codes, seismic, everything triple, quadruple. Then are the members liable to make up the difference of replacement value after the policy is exhausted?
Here's what I would love. I'll note it, but can you email it? I would like our attorneys to give a proper answer because I don't know the answer to that. And I think it's a very valid question. And I don't want to assume anything. And I would like to then include it in our recap email where we answer questions from members.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Let's do that. Thank you.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes, and then another in the back.
This has been very informative. I myself feel like I'm going with option A because in my over 10 years here, we've had a reserve and it's never been used. Look at the carpet. Look at this place. Why haven't they upgraded in the 10 plus years I've been here? Stick with your budget. I've worked with budget. I've worked with the county with their budgets. You stick to a budget. Your assessment should cover everything. I'm not for any special assessments of any.
Just to clarify, the reserves are for repairing and replacing things that already exist. That's operating. So there's two different things here. Operating is the annual consumption that it takes to run the association. Reserves cover assets and things that already exist. If it's all line item. If we want to be adding a new item, we're not just going to inflate operating blindly to have some fund to pull from to add new things. Because that unnecessarily burdens our members to say, we're going to charge you more every year for things we don't know we want yet. That's not really best practice. If we want to add anything new that doesn't exist, that is where a special assessment comes into play. And I think likely part of that was the intent of we're going to do some big thing to tear down this building and change it. We're not going to take out the carpet and replace it. I can't speak to why that's been done. I've not been on the board for 10 years. It's been 18 months, but that's fine. This is why we want member input, is this feedback. Where do you directionally want the board to stand? So your feedback and your input, your vote on this is very valuable. And everyone has any right to vote for any option. We're not trying to push one way or the other, but we're trying to make sure everyone understands the parameters of what's being considered here. I want to let Jennifer in the back here ask our final question.
Yep, thank you. Just the one question about option B, you talked about the nice to haves. So if I'm voting for option B, I don't know what the nice to haves are. And as you said, we won't really know until we go through the next 3 or 4 years and decide what those nice to haves, and you're going to vote on them. But I think the members are kind of at a loss on voting for option B because they don't know what might be in it.
Part of it is in the handout that you're holding with a little more detail. There will be additional information in the survey link as well while you're there reading it and considering what am I voting for. Again, I understand it's a lot of information and it's a lot to digest in a town hall form, in a printout form, in a survey form. We're trying to lay out everything that's being considered so that you do have that information. But again, there's a balance too of we can't promise any of these things because they are individually approved by each board. So for example, the gym, the idea of a gym that has been on members' radar for 6 to 8 years. If that were to be presented to the board, there could be directors who don't support throwing money at a gym. They may say, okay, for 50,000, let's go clear our green belts instead. Every single item is going to need to be considered at the board with the membership. And so what the ask is right now is, okay, does the board look to stay lean and mean in what we're spending and doing in the building? Or does the board look at how can we maximize the space for how it's being used, how our membership functions in it, how the staff function in it, all of that. Every single piece has to still be considered openly with the membership. So it is a little bit of a weird balance of, okay, I would love to lay out, here's a fully designed plan for B. I have no guarantee of that. Even this current board has no guarantee of that. Even if the board were in total lockstep on every single item, it's not all going to be accomplished in 6 months. And the board dynamic changes again in June. And you've got a whole new year to consider every item. So again, we are trying to balance giving as much information as possible, but also with the understanding of we can't promise any blanket overall approval. Each individual item has to be individually approved.
Okay, I get it. I just wanted to make sure you're also providing other feedback as to what those additional nice to haves look like. For example, like you said, having a gym, improving maybe the rec room, maybe what are just you're going to be including some of that for B of what some ideas are will be vetted.
Yes.
That's what I'm asking.
Trying to give as much of that in the survey link information.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Randall wants to cap with one last comment. Markel, I'm happy to answer your question after.
Very quick. Beth had a question though on the projects and overruns and all that. George and I have worked extensively. If there is a project that passes through,
Minimize the chatter, guys.
oh, sorry, if there's a project that is approved in open session, it could be all reserves or 99% reserves, whatever. There will be detail line items. There will be a monthly accounting. The budget that's been approved, where are we this month, where are we the next month, and if something goes wrong, it'll be done on a monthly basis. You'll get a real-time, almost real-time check and not be blind for months or years on what's progressing. So I just wanted, that was a very good question she had, and it's something that will be addressed. Anything that's approved will be tracked in detail on a monthly basis. Any variances or surprises, deal with them real time. That's all.
Markel, we'll close as your last question. I have 2 minutes. Okay, sounds good. Thank you, everyone, for coming